"Leave my house, Aisha. You've embarrassed this family enough." My mother Eleanor's voice was sharp, cold, and final. I stood there in the sterile living room, suitcase in hand, those words cutting deeper than anything I'd ever heard. It was supposed to be a short visit. I had flown back home after years away, hoping to reconnect after my father Marcus's passing, maybe share a meal and some stories. But instead of warmth, I found walls. My mother's smile was tight, her tone distant. My brother, Jamal, didn't even bother to say hello. It felt like I'd walked into someone else's house, not the one I grew up in. She didn't know who I'd become. She still saw the girl who dropped out of college, the one who once borrowed money and came home crying when things didn't work out. To her, I was still a disappointment, a broken promise. Her perception was a cage she had built around me years ago, and she refused to look beyond its bars. I never told her what I'd built after. I never mentioned the nights I worked until sunrise or how I'd forged a company from a small apartment with one old laptop. That night, when she told me to leave, I didn't argue. I could have told her everything about my company, about how I'd made more money than our whole family combined. But I didn't. I just stood there silent, trying not to let her see the pain in my face. She thought she was ending a problem. What she didn't know was that she was ending the last piece of family I was holding on to. I walked out quietly. The air outside was cold, and I could feel tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I looked back once, just once, at the house I'd called home for 28 years. It didn't look the same. The grand structure, once a symbol of family, now felt like a stranger's place, cold and unwelcoming. The porch light flickered, an unsteady glow against the gathering dusk. It was a small detail, but it twisted in my gut. I remembered how my dad, Marcus, used to fix it every Sunday, his laughter echoing through the evening air. Now it was just another broken thing in that house, a symbol of all the other things that had fallen apart since he was gone. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, trying to understand how a mother could look at her own child with so much anger, so much dismissal. Years I had spent wanting to make her proud, hoping that when she saw me again, things would finally be different. But they weren't. As I drove away, the engine a low hum against the silence of my grief, I promised myself one thing. I wouldn't look back. Not until I had nothing left to prove. Not until the pain stopped feeling like rejection and started feeling like freedom. I didn't know then what the future held. But something in me changed that night. I wasn't just leaving her house. I was leaving behind every bit of doubt she'd ever planted in me. It was the start of something new. A quiet revolution within my soul. Even if it didn't feel that way. Not yet. Growing up, I always knew my mother loved Jamal more. She never said it out loud, but I felt it in everything she did. When he scored well in school, she threw a party, inviting all our relatives, her voice brimming with pride. When I brought home good grades, she barely looked up from her magazine, offering a quick, absent-minded, "That's nice, dear." Jamal was her pride. Her perfect boy destined for greatness. And I was the girl who was too sensitive, too emotional, or simply too much. I was always in his shadow, yearning for a warmth that never reached me. I tried to earn her approval, to mold myself into the daughter she wanted, but no matter what I did, it was never enough. Jamal could do no wrong. Even when he messed up, Mom found a way to excuse it. If he failed a test, she'd declare the teacher was unfair, or the material too challenging. If I did the same, her eyes would narrow, and she'd say I hadn't studied hard enough, hadn't applied myself. I learned early that love in our house was not given freely. It had to be earned, meticulously, painstakingly. And even then, I never seemed to qualify. Dad was the only one who truly saw me, who believed in me. He'd take me to his workshop, a place filled with the rich, comforting scent of sawdust and oil, and show me how things worked. He'd patiently explain circuits and gears, telling me that curiosity wasn't a flaw, but a gift. I'd sit on a small stool, watching his hands, absorbing his quiet wisdom. He used to say, "One day, Aisha, the same things they mock you for will make you great." I held on to that for years, a precious anchor in a sea of doubt. His workshop wasn't just a place for fixing things, it was where I learned to dream. So when I told Mom I wanted to drop out of college to start my own company, her reaction was like a cold slap. "You're throwing your life away," she said, her voice sharp with disgust, mirroring the sneer on her face. You'll end up broke and alone. She told me to stop dreaming and start being realistic, like Jamal, who had a safe job in accounting. I tried to explain what I was building, how excited I was about my idea, but she cut me off every time. "You're not cut out for business," she declared. "You're just chasing fantasies." Her words were like stones, crushing the budding hope inside me. After I left that day, the silence between us grew into an unbridgeable chasm. She never called to ask how I was doing. Not once. Years passed, and I worked quietly, building something from nothing, far away from their judgment. I wanted to tell her that I was doing well, that her predictions were wrong, but I knew it wouldn't matter. She wouldn't believe it until someone else told her, until external validation somehow forced her to see. So I just kept working, fueled by a quiet, burning determination. When Dad passed away, I went back home for the memorial. It was the hardest thing I had done in years. The house looked the same, but it didn't feel like home anymore. The pictures on the wall showed a family that no longer existed, a facade I could never truly be a part of. I thought maybe for one day we could put the past aside and grieve together, united by our shared loss. But the moment I walked in, I saw it in her eyes, the same cold look, the same disappointment. Jamal stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, playing the part of the perfect, grieving son. She barely hugged me. She didn't ask how I was. Didn't even say she was glad I came. Instead, she offered, "You look tired, Aisha. Life catching up to you." I forced a smile, but inside I felt the same old, familiar ache. It was a wound that never truly healed, only scabbed over. I realized then that some things never changed. No matter what I did, I'd never be enough for Eleanor. The only person who ever truly saw me, who believed in me unconditionally, was gone, and all that was left was the emptiness he left behind. The finality of it all was crushing. The day after Dad's memorial, a heavy quiet still clung to the house. I went upstairs to grab my jacket, needing a moment of air before heading back to the cemetery. As I came down the hallway, voices drifted from the kitchen, my mother Eleanor's sharp tone, then Jamal's careless laugh. I didn't mean to listen, but then I heard it, my own name, cutting through the silence. My steps faltered, and I froze, pressing myself against the cool wall, a familiar dread coiling in my stomach. Eleanor's voice, laced with disdain, reached me. "She's still pathetic," she said, as if discussing a trivial acquaintance. "Almost 30 and still pretending she has some kind of career. I don't even know how she looks people in the eye." Jamal chuckled, a sound that always grated on my nerves. "Yeah, she's always been dramatic. Remember when she said she'd build her own company? I bet she's barely paying rent somewhere." My chest tightened, a searing pain, as if their words were physical blows. It wasn't the first time, but hearing their casual cruelty, their shared amusement, cut deeper than usual. Then Eleanor said something that made my stomach plummet. "Anyway, I want to sell that old workshop of your father's. It's just sitting there collecting dust. We could use the money." The words echoed, cold and pragmatic, in the silent hall. That workshop. It wasn't just a building. It was the one place that still felt like Dad, filled with the scent of oil and lingering dreams. It was where I learned to believe in myself. Selling it felt like erasing him completely, a final, devastating act of disrespect. Jamal's voice broke through my daze, agreeing without hesitation. "Good idea. Maybe we can turn it into something useful this time." Their laughter, shared and dismissive, pierced me. It wasn't just the idea of selling it. It was Jamal's utter indifference, his callous disregard for our father's memory. In that moment, the isolation I'd felt for years solidified into an unshakable truth. They would never understand. They never truly had. Before I could stop myself, I stepped into the kitchen. My voice trembled, raw with anguish. "You can't sell it," I pleaded, the words barely a whisper. "That place was Dad's heart. You can't just get rid of it like it means nothing." Eleanor turned, her eyes narrowing, her face hardening. Jamal stood impassive, a spectator to my pain. I wasn't just fighting for a building. I was fighting for Dad's memory, for the last piece of him they seemed so intent on discarding. "Don't start, Aisha," Eleanor commanded, her voice sharp. "It's my house. My decision. You don't contribute a cent here." My shoulders slumped, but I pushed back one last time. "It's not about money," I said quietly, desperate for her to understand. It's about respect. It's about Dad. Her face remained unyielding, a stone wall against my pain. She saw only defiance, not a daughter grieving her father's desecrated legacy. I felt powerless, trapped in a dynamic I could never escape. Eleanor's voice rose, sharp and final, cutting through the heavy air. "If you don't like how I run my house, you can leave." Then, with a chilling coldness that sealed my fate, she repeated, "I said, leave my house." The words hung in the air, echoing through every corner of that kitchen, through every memory of my childhood. They were not just a command. They were a definitive expulsion, a final severing of what little ties remained. Jamal didn't say a word. He just stood there, watching me, almost amused, a faint smirk playing on his lips. In his silence, in his casual indifference, I saw the complete abandonment. There was nothing left to fight for. The home I loved, the family I wanted to believe in, it was all gone, replaced by a cold, hard truth. I was an outsider, banished, with no one left to stand by me. That night, I packed my things. There was no scene, no dramatic tears, just the quiet rustle of fabric as I folded clothes into my suitcase. I moved silently through the house, taking only what I absolutely needed, leaving behind the memories that felt more like shackles than treasures. As I passed by the old workshop, Marcus's sanctuary, I stopped for a moment. The door, usually ajar, was closed tight, a symbolic barrier. My heart ached, but my resolve hardened. This wasn't a retreat. It was a tactical withdrawal. I wasn't just leaving a house, I was leaving a past that had tried to bury me. I pushed open the workshop door, the familiar scent of sawdust and oil washing over me like a forgotten embrace. This was the one place that still felt like Dad. The tools were still lined up neatly on his workbench, exactly as he'd left them. My heart ached with a profound, quiet grief. I took off the old silver watch he'd given me when I was 16, the one with the worn leather strap, and placed it gently on the rough wooden surface. "I'll come back for you one day," I whispered, the promise a sacred trust between us. Then, I closed the door, not knowing it would be the last time I'd ever see that house in the same way. Seattle was nothing like home, and for that I was grateful. It was quiet, anonymous, and that was enough for me. I rented a small apartment above a coffee shop. The paint was peeling, and the neighbors were noisy, but I didn't care. It was mine. It was the first place where I could truly breathe, without the constant expectation of judgment. I set up a small desk by the window, placed my old laptop on it, and looked out at the unfamiliar city. This, I told myself, was where my new life would truly begin. Days blurred into weeks, then months. I barely noticed time passing. I worked every single day, from the first sliver of sunrise until the moon hung high and full, building my software from scratch. There were nights when I forgot to eat, and mornings when I woke up, still hunched over my keyboard, the screen casting a pale glow on my face. No one was cheering me on, and I didn't expect anyone to. Eleanor's cutting words still echoed in my head, but instead of breaking me, they forged a steel resolve. I wanted to prove her wrong, even if she never saw it. I named my company Luminous Systems. The idea had come to me late one night, a whisper from the past, from the only voice that truly mattered. It was something my dad Marcus used to say, his hands stained with oil, his eyes twinkling with belief. "You can't see the light unless you build it yourself, Aisha." Those words had been my anchor, my secret strength against the rising tide of doubt that Eleanor had tried to drown me in. I wanted that light to stand for something real, something that shone brighter than any shadow cast by my past. It wasn't just a company, it was a testament, a beacon built from the fragments of my broken dreams and the enduring wisdom of my father. I stared at the name on my laptop screen, a quiet, fierce resolve burning within me. This was my light, and I was going to make it blaze. At first, the world seemed determined to keep me in the dark. Investors ignored my emails, their silence echoing Eleanor's dismissive laughter. Most days I doubted myself, her words about me chasing fantasies playing on a cruel loop in my mind. The first 2 years were an endless gauntlet of doubt, a blur of sleepless nights and caffeine-fueled mornings. I lived off instant noodles, the cheap plastic containers piling up beside my second-hand furniture. My small apartment was a Spartan battlefield where I wrestled with code and self-doubt. But every rejection, every late-night ache in my eyes, every forgotten meal, served as a stark reminder of why I started. I had nothing left to lose. The pain of their dismissal had stripped me bare. But in that barrenness I found a fierce, unyielding freedom. I had only myself to prove right. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. A single small client, a cautious leap of faith, turned into 3, then 10. People started talking about my software, an AI system that could learn human emotion patterns faster and more accurately than anything else on the market. It was a glimmer of light in the long, dark tunnel. My inbox, once barren, now held inquiries. My small team, a collection of brilliant minds who believed in the vision more than the profit, worked with a camaraderie I'd always longed for in a family. We were building something real, something revolutionary. The money didn't come right away, but the validation did. A quiet hum of recognition that slowly began to drown out the echoes of my mother's disdain. My light was building, one line of code, one satisfied client at a time. By the 3rd year, Luminous Systems wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Our software, with its groundbreaking AI that could learn human emotion patterns, was being used by major companies across the country. My inbox overflowed with investors offering partnerships, eager to join what was fast becoming a tech phenomenon. I had built a small team, a diverse group of brilliant minds who believed in the vision more than the profit. We worked together like a true family, the kind I had always wished for. And through it all, I maintained my anonymity. When the first big investor finally reached out, I used the name M. Cooper. I didn't want anyone to connect me to my past, to my family. I wanted to be judged only for my work, not for where I came from or the pain I carried. When Luminous Systems went public in its 5th year, everything changed overnight. Reporters called non-stop. Banks wanted meetings. And my name, or rather M. Cooper's name, was suddenly everywhere. My net worth crossed an unimaginable $400 million. But I didn't feel rich. Not in the way people expected. I still lived simply, still woke up early, still worked until my eyes burned. The numbers were just that. Numbers on a screen. A testament to what focus and resilience could build. They were not a measure of my worth, only a reflection of the scale of my purpose. The wealth felt strangely detached from me, a tool more than a trophy. Not once did my phone ring with a call from home. No message from my mother, no congratulations from Jamal. They didn't even know who M. Cooper was. For a long time I had imagined how that ignorance would sting, how it might make me feel even more unseen. But instead, it gave me peace. They had built impenetrable walls around their pride, and I had built something real, something that transcended their limited view of me. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had finally found my own kind of family in my work, in my purpose, and in the quiet strength that came from being completely on my own. It was a liberation I hadn't known I craved. The envelope arrived on a quiet Monday morning. I almost threw it away, thinking it was another business letter, another pitch. But when I saw the familiar handwriting, neat, sharp, and unmistakably my mother's, my hands froze. I opened it slowly, and a gold-edged wedding invitation slipped out. My brother Jamal was getting married. For a long moment, I just stared at the card, reading the words over and over. It felt strange seeing his name printed in fancy letters, surrounded by floral designs. Beneath it, the bride's name was written in elegant cursive, Simone Dubois. I remembered her instantly. Simone was the girl Jamal dated in college, the one who had laughed at me years ago when I'd told her about my wild dream of building a company. "You? A businesswoman?" she'd said, her laughter echoing in my memory as if it were the funniest thing she'd ever heard. I hadn't seen her since, but now, she was going to be part of my family. The irony was a bitter twist in my gut. I set the invitation on my desk, unsure how to feel. The wedding was being held at the family estate, my old home, the very place I'd been told to leave. My chest tightened as I thought about walking through those doors again. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend I never received it, but then I noticed a smaller note tucked behind the card. It was written in Jamal's familiar scrawl. My eyes scanned the casual words. "We'd love to see you if you can afford the trip. I stared at that line for a long time. The words were casual, almost an afterthought, but the meaning was clear. It wasn't an invitation. It was an insult, a stark reminder of how they still saw me. The poor, lost sister who never amounted to anything. My hands trembled, but not from anger. It was disbelief. After all these years, after everything I had built, they still thought of me as the same girl they had pushed aside. I sat there for a long time after reading Jamal's note, the words, "If you can afford the trip," echoing in my mind. I could have crumpled the invitation, thrown it away, and continued with my life of quiet success. But something deeper stirred within me, not out of a desire for revenge, not even just out of pride. It was a need to face them one last time, to show them what they had so carelessly thrown away. That night I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The girl who had once been unsure, quiet, and full of fear was gone. In her place stood a woman who had built an empire from nothing, something no one could take from her. Still, a flicker of nervousness remained, not because I craved their approval, but because I knew this visit would finally close a chapter I had clung to for far too long. I placed the invitation on my desk beside my laptop, a quiet smile playing on my lips. If only they knew. The house they had once thrown me out of, the house I had cried over, was just another property now. And soon, they would realize that the girl they had dismissed was no longer standing outside their door, begging to be let in. She was walking in on her own terms. The day of the wedding arrived, cloaked in soft rain and a sky the color of slate. As the sleek limousine rolled down the familiar winding road toward the estate, I felt a strange, profound calm settle over me. The same driveway I had once walked down with a single suitcase in my trembling hand now stretched out before me, lined with elegant white roses and a parade of shining, expensive cars. Years had passed, but the house itself seemed untouched by time. The tall iron gates, the weathered stone walls, the fountain my father had meticulously built before his passing. Everything looked exactly as I remembered. Yet it all felt profoundly different. The driver stopped smoothly in front of the main entrance. I took a slow, steady breath, the cool air filling my lungs, and stepped out. The click of my heels against the paved driveway echoed louder than I expected, drawing eyes. Guests turned their heads, their murmurs like a rising tide, curious whispers trying to place the unfamiliar figure. My black limousine and simple, elegantly tailored dress stood out amongst the crowd, but no one recognized me. Not yet. Inside, the house pulsed with the vibrant hum of laughter, the soft strains of music, and the heavy scent of expensive perfumes. I walked in quietly, allowing my gaze to sweep over everything. Pictures of Jamal and Simone, perfectly posed and smiling, adorned every wall, a tableau of a life I was not a part of. For a fleeting moment, a sliver of doubt pricked at me. Had I made a mistake by coming here? Then I saw her. My mother, Eleanor, stood gracefully by the grand staircase, her usual proud smile fixed in place as she greeted an endless stream of guests. She turned, her smile prepared for another arrival. But the instant her eyes met mine, her face went utterly pale. The smile vanished, replaced by a mask of disbelief. For a few seconds, she didn't utter a sound. Her hand, which had been holding a delicate glass of champagne, trembled almost imperceptibly. "Aisha," she finally whispered, the name barely audible, as if she couldn't quite believe what her eyes were seeing. I offered a gentle, almost imperceptible smile. "It's just Miss Cooper now." Her lips parted, but no words followed, swallowed by the sudden, heavy silence that stretched between us. The silence hung thick and heavy between us, an unspoken testament to years of estrangement and the stark contrast of my presence. It stretched until Jamal appeared beside my mother, Simone's hand clasped firmly in his. When his eyes landed on me, he froze. His confident expression caught somewhere between utter confusion and outright disbelief. Simone, ever the scrutinizer, looked me up and down, her eyes narrowing as if trying to place a face she should have remembered but couldn't quite grasp. My mother, Eleanor, attempted to recover her poise, subtly adjusting her dress, trying to project an image of normalcy, but the tremor in her hand and the wide, disbelieving look in her eyes betrayed her. She wasn't sure how to talk to me anymore. I wasn't someone she could scold or control. I stood tall, calm, and utterly composed. My clothes, my posture, the quiet confidence in my gaze. Everything about me was different now. The timid girl who had once pleaded to be seen was gone. The woman standing before them didn't need their approval. She commanded respect simply by existing. The wedding reception was bright and noisy, a cacophony of laughter, clinking glasses, and the rustle of expensive fabrics. I sat quietly at one of the back tables, a silent observer in a world that once defined me. My assistant, Ava, stood discreetly nearby, her phone in hand, ensuring everything was in order. A few of my security personnel, dressed in plain black suits, blended seamlessly with the guests, a subtle reminder of the life I now led. I hadn't planned for such an entourage, but my company had insisted. "You're too valuable to travel alone," they'd said. I hadn't argued. At first, no one recognized me. People glanced my way, their whispers carrying fragments of curiosity. A few approached, asking where I was from or who had invited me. I offered polite, brief answers, careful not to mention my full name. The less they knew, the better. Then, Jamal and Simone made their grand entrance. Hands clasped, grins wide as everyone clapped. Eleanor stood proudly beside them, radiating a familiar, almost blinding pride. From my seat, I felt a strange detachment, as if watching a scene from someone else's life. These people, once my family, now felt like strangers. Later during dinner, I found myself seated just a few tables away from the happy couple. Jamal, surrounded by his business friends, was in his element, bragging loudly about his latest property purchases. "I just bought 2 acres near the lake," he announced, his voice carrying across the room. "Got them at a steal. You know real estate is where the real money is." His friends chuckled and raised their glasses in approval. Eleanor leaned in, her smile tight with maternal pride. "That's my son, always thinking ahead." I said nothing, merely taking a sip of water. I wasn't here to compete. But then, Jamal's eyes met mine across the tables. That same smug look he used to give me when we were children flickered across his face. "So, Aisha," he said, feigning friendliness, "you still doing that tech thing, or did that phase pass?" Soft, dismissive laughs rippled from his table. I took another sip of water, my gaze steady as I met his. "Still doing it," I said calmly, my voice even. "It's going well, actually." He nodded, already uninterested, his attention drifting back to his friends. "Good for you. Maybe one day you'll buy a little place, too." I set down my glass, the faint clink echoing in the sudden quiet that seemed to settle over our corner of the room. I looked at him, then at Eleanor, whose fork, halfway to her mouth, had frozen in midair. "Funny you mention that," I said, my tone deceptively casual. "I recently bought a large piece of land nearby." My voice was soft, but it carried. "Actually, under this very estate." The room went completely silent. A few people stopped eating, their conversations dying abruptly. Jamal's brow furrowed, his earlier smirk replaced by confusion. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice losing its usual bravado. Eleanor's eyes were wide, fixed on me, a tremor running through her hand. It was as if I'd spoken a foreign language, or perhaps a forbidden truth. The air thickened with unspoken questions, with a tension that stretched taut across the tables. Eleanor let out a shaky, forced laugh, trying to dismiss my words. "Oh, Aisha, that's a good one," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You always had a wild imagination." She attempted a smile, but it faltered, unable to mask the dawning horror in her eyes. I returned her gaze with a polite, unyielding smile. "It's not a joke, Mom," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "The deal closed last month." The silence that followed was absolute, heavy with the weight of my words. Jamal's smile vanished completely, replaced by a stunned, almost angry frown. Eleanor's face, already pale, drained of what little color remained. Around us, whispers started spreading again, this time louder, sharper, and laced with undeniable shock. Guests turned their heads, openly staring, their expressions a mix of disbelief and growing intrigue. They knew. They didn't know how, but they knew the truth had just been spoken. I picked up my glass and took another sip, pretending not to notice the sudden, intense scrutiny. I didn't need to prove anything else. The truth had already spoken for itself. The silence in the room was suffocating. Every eye was on me, waiting for someone to speak. For an explanation, a denial. Eleanor's nervous laugh had completely faded, and Jamal's confident grin was gone. replaced by an expression that suggested he was desperately trying to figure out if I was bluffing. The tension spread quickly, people shifting uncomfortably, unsure if they were witnessing a family joke or something far more significant. I took a slow breath and stood up. My chair scraped lightly against the marble floor, the sound echoing louder than it should have in the sudden quiet. "Since everyone seems curious," I said calmly, my voice steady, "maybe I should clear a few things up." Jamal tried to regain his composure, pushing back his own chair. "All right, Aisha, enough of the games. What are you talking about? You can't possibly own this land." I met his eyes, a quiet strength settling over me. "I can, and I do." I nodded subtly to Ava, who stepped forward and handed me a small, sealed envelope. Inside, I found a printed copy of the deed transfer, officially sealed and signed. I placed it gently on the table in front of Eleanor. "I bought it back," I said softly, the words hanging in the air. "You told me to leave your house, Mom, so I did. But now it's mine, and I'm asking you to leave my house." Eleanor stared at the papers, her face draining of all color. "You're lying," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This can't be true." "It's true," I confirmed. "Check the signature." Jamal snatched the papers, scanning them quickly, his eyes darting across the legal text. His voice cracked as he read aloud. "You bought it through Lumina Holdings. That's the company that bought out my firm last month." He looked up, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. I looked at him, then nodded once. "Yes, Luminous Systems, my company." He froze, the full weight of the revelation hitting him. "Wait, your company, you mean?" "Yes," I said. "I'm the CEO and founder." Gasps rippled through the room. Even the band in the corner stopped playing for a moment. People who had ignored me all evening were now staring as if they'd never seen me before. Eleanor's hand shook as she reached for the glass in front of her, her lips trembling. "You're Lumina?" she said weakly. "But they said the founder was M. Cooper." "That's me," I said quietly. I didn't want anyone to know, especially not family. The room felt smaller now, heavy with disbelief. Eleanor looked at me, as if seeing me for the very first time, a stranger in her own home. Jamal's face turned a deep, furious red with humiliation, and Simone, his fiancée, avoided eye contact completely, shrinking in her seat. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone," I said softly, my voice steady, cutting through the stunned silence. "I just wanted to do right by Dad. This was his home, a place that should have been treated with love." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Aisha, please," she whispered, reaching a trembling hand toward me. I shook my head gently. "It's too late, Mom. You made your choice years ago." Jamal, finally breaking from his shock, slammed his glass down. "You think this makes you better than us?" he yelled, his voice raw with anger. "You think buying a house makes you family again?" I looked at him calmly. "No, Jamal. I stopped trying to be a part of this family a long time ago." He glared at me and stormed out of the hall, pushing past stunned guests and leaving a heavy silence in his wake. I turned back to my mother. She looked smaller, broken. "I didn't know," she said, her voice cracking. "Please forgive me." A deep weariness washed over me. I had imagined this moment so many times, but there was no triumph, only exhaustion. "I'm not here for revenge," I said. "Dad used to say that home isn't where you live, it's where you're loved. I finally understand that." I placed the silver key to the house on the table beside the deed. "I'm leaving it here," I said quietly. "You can keep the house. I don't need it anymore." She looked up, confused. "But it's yours now." I nodded. "I know. That's why I can walk away from it." I turned and started toward the door. The guests parted silently. As I stepped into the cool air, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I wasn't leaving with anger or pain, just peace, the kind my father always wanted for me.